doesn't anybody, including members of the medical profession, understand that the suffering I am going through is benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome? I have been told by a senior worker in the addiction field, "You've been off the benzos for weeks now. It can't be them, and you said you were anxious before you started taking benzos, and that anxiety has now come back." Even though my anxiety from benzo withdrawal actually feels different to my previous anxiety. I once asked my primary care physician if I could give them some information about benzo withdrawal. And they said to me, they didn't have the time to read up on other matters, let alone getting time to read up on benzo withdrawal. I said to them, "This isn't good. You're my primary care physician and you don't know enough about my condition to treat it correctly. And you're not even willing to learn more about it." Quote, "They have still, to this day, never read up about my condition. I was sitting with another GP recently and painstakingly told him I was suffering from protracted benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome, whilst including a description of some of my symptoms, which included anxiety, panic, loss of self, unreality, depersonalization, air hunger or dyspnea, electric shocks in arms and muscle jerks and twitches all over, restless legs that often develop during the evening or when trying to relax or sleep, visual hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, early awakening at 2 or 3 in the morning every morning, insomnia, terrifying thoughts on awakening and feeling frightened of everything, suicidal ideations, severe sinusitis and severe tinnitus." I don't think they heard a word of what I said, because the next phrase they uttered and then entered into my medical notes was re-emergence of a past tendency for anxiety. I would think, but my new anxiety feels different to my previous anxiety. Every time this happened, I would be sent downwards into a spiral of frustration and disbelief that no one I approached could understand or even acknowledge what I was suffering from. Monsieur, I know my body so well and I know what I'm suffering from. I would say to myself, the anxiety doesn't feel the same as normal anxiety. It's different. I never had feelings of depersonalization or unreality before taking benzos. I have never suffered before from hallucinations or sinusitis or tinnitus or eye hunger or restless legs. What's more is these symptoms can wax and wane in their appearance and severity. I can get periods, often called windows, of feeling quite normal, with little or no anxiety, and with a high level of cognition, only to be slammed with a wave of symptoms that make descending down into the pits of hell an attractive alternative. I underwent a far too rapid medically supervised detox from 10 years of high-dose diazepam use, which was 300 mg per day at its peak, to 0 in 14 days. This goes against everything that is in the Aston Manual and widespread recommendations for withdrawal. I have since learned that this may be one of the most successful ways to initiate a protracted benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome. A long slow taper, as described in the Aston Manual, of reducing the benzo around 10% every 2 to 3 weeks is a far more humane method. If the patient is feeling the reductions are being made too quickly, then the rate of the taper should be reduced. What is more is that no human should be forced to withdraw from benzos against their will. Benzo withdrawal can be a terrible thing for any human to endure, and to do so without their permission is equivalent in seriousness to a cruel malpractice. So why don't the medical profession know or understand it? This is the very question that can be found racing through the minds of nearly everyone who has gone through the agony of benzo withdrawal. Why doesn't my healthcare provider know or understand what I am going through? Why won't they believe what I have told them? Why do they dismiss everything I have said? Why is it so difficult for them to support me? Benzo withdrawal is not an unknown or newly discovered malady. The tolerance to benzos and harsh withdrawal were first described in the literature decades ago. Thousands of people have gone through this and thousands more will be trying to get through it. I have worked for many years as a healthcare provider, and as I am someone who is also going through the dark distress of benzo withdrawal, I would like to shed some light on this topic. Doctors and other healthcare providers are trained and taught to diagnose and to treat. I went to university alongside many great friends who were studying medicine. Initially they learned some of the fundamentals of the science of our bodies, including anatomy, biochemistry and physiology. Then they studied pathophysiology, which examines what occurs when our bodily systems go awry. There are a severely limited number of pharmacology, or science of drugs, courses and far too many medications to cover in those classes. After leaving the training environment, a large number of health professionals become involved with continuing education. And again, they may miss any introduction to a specifically detailed topic such as benzo withdrawal syndrome. Here is an example of the medical profession's education on Georgetown University School of Medicine's Pharmacology Department webpage. A description of the course is provided. The second year's course in pharmacology introduces the student to the scientific basis for the use of certain drugs in medical practice and the essential principles of clinical pharmacology. Since it is impossible to learn about each of the several thousand prescription drugs currently available, the course concentrates on selected prototype drugs and general pharmacologic principles that govern the action of all drugs in the body. This is an admission to the fact that there is far too much information to teach our new healthcare professionals, and some important topics clearly get missed out. Healthcare professionals are taught during their education to take a patient's history and observe the presenting symptoms and develop a diagnosis of perhaps a number of different disorders that will get narrowed down after laboratory or exploratory testing has been completed. They will then treat you for that diagnosed condition. They will actually prefer to come up with the diagnosis themselves and not have a patient tell them in great detail what the diagnosis should be. So based on my history and current symptoms, what will be the diagnosis? The diagnosis will be formed based on the healthcare provider's knowledge of disorders that are caused by the history and symptoms you present with. So if the provider has no knowledge of the intricacies of benzo withdrawal syndrome, they will not be able to include that in their list of diagnosis. In the situation of myself presenting with the above symptoms, they are often likely to assess me and misdiagnose me as having a re-emergence of a pre-existing anxiety disorder. Why didn't they include a diagnosis of benzo withdrawal syndrome? It's simply that they were not aware of its existence and that it could be a possible diagnosis. We, as a group of suffering patients, are far more knowledgeable and more widely read about benzo withdrawal syndrome than any other people on the planet. To us it is something, oh so obvious. This is what can cause us tremendous frustration when our healthcare providers do not have the same knowledge or seem unable to empathize with our condition. So where does that leave us? I have discovered that I need to be selective about which healthcare professionals I continue to have a relationship with. If I find that they do not have an understanding and appreciation of benzo withdrawal syndrome, I will move on and seek help from someone else. I have come to accept the fact that when I see any new healthcare professional, they may not have the knowledge of benzo withdrawal syndrome to help me. I have even come to accept that some healthcare professionals who describe themselves as experts in the field of addiction may not actually have a thorough understanding of the topic of withdrawal. and recovery, or specifically what I am suffering from, monsieur. So please remember, for your own sanity, that it is likely not your healthcare professional's fault that they do not understand your benzo withdrawal syndrome. It is their compact education and limited experience of working with benzo withdrawal syndrome sufferers that is the cause of the problem, monsieur, although I do feel they should even be somewhat willing to become educated in this area. And with regards to my primary care physician who did not have the time or desire to learn more to help me to suffer less, I no longer see them, refused to see them again, and have moved on. Please do get in touch with me if you want to learn more about benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome and how I have been coping, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and enduring the bumpy ride through hell.